Hi there, I'm Diane Callahan, developmental editor and YouTuber quotidian writer. I'm here with Marie McCue, who is the co-writer of Unbound Life, alongside Riley Rookhouse. And Riley Rookhouse is the high fantasy pen name of our very own Jordan Riley Swan. So they've also written two novellas in the same high fantasy world. So that's Mina of Misfortunes and Viet of Vows. And you've worked on with Story Garden for about 2 years now, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think we just hit the 2-year mark.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's been wonderful to have you on the team and to be working on so many projects together. I'd love to hear more about the novel, about Unbound Life. So how would you describe what it's about?
That's a good question. I would say, I guess in a nutshell, it's about three young adults with very different agendas and different ways of looking at this fantasy world that they inhabit, and what happens when their worlds kind of collide and their lives are turned upside down by something that happens that none of them could have anticipated, and just the repercussions on the world and on them. And yeah, it's been an absolute blast to write, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, it was a really fun book. I read it recently and I really enjoyed it. And it is hard to describe without spoiling anything, because sort
Right,
of the hinge point of what happens to each of them is very it's really fun to read about it, the sort of fantastical experience that each of them goes through that's very traumatic for all of them, but and all magic related. And yeah, it's in this world where people they go train at the celestial observatory, right, to try to become almost elevated to this higher stage, this ascension with the celestial dragon. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the big world building components, although it's a world that feels very lived in, that's much larger than that, which is why there's so many different books set in this world of Heavenfall, because there's a lot to explore there. But so with this book, what was the drafting timeline like? Like, how long did the whole process take from start to finish?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question, because originally it started out as three separate novellas that ended up
Right.
getting sort of combined and reworked into this one sort of long epic fantasy book. And so we first, the novellas came into being in mid 2020, and then yeah, I think towards the beginning of 2021 was when we decided to turn it into one book, and then it took all the way up until 2022 to just rework it and make it cohesive as a standalone single book.
Yeah. And it really does feel cohesive, because I think that would be surprising to a lot of readers of it. Like, when you're reading it, it feels like it was almost meant to be threaded together that way, because there's a very cause and effect relationship in the plot. And it is like it's like a normal length novel. It's not like too ginormous. Like, I think here it's like 330 pages maybe, which is it's like a good length for a high fantasy book without being like a Brandon Sanderson doorstopper or something.
Exactly.
But yeah, so no, that's really interesting. And then so when it comes to writing in general, like when you sit down to write, like what's your process like? Do you have any special routines or?
That is a great question. I think I've played around with different processes since I started writing, but I think for me the biggest thing is to not think too much and to just get the words on the page, and sort of follow my inspiration in terms of which sections of each chapter I write first, and the order that I end up drafting them and stringing them together. And so that I think is a way for me to get over a lot of the perfectionism that comes when you're doing a rough draft, and this inclination to edit as you're writing, which is a tough one to get over, because it's when you're drafting, you kind of just need it on the page, and then in subsequent passes, that's when you polish it. And so yeah, just forcing myself to write and not think too much has been the most successful process.
That's so true. And so that means that you tend to write out of order slightly?
Yes, yeah, I'll usually like when I look at the outline for a chapter, I'll kind of pick the section of it that speaks to me the most, and then I'll kind of, it's like puzzle pieces, and
Yes.
then string them together.
Yes, it's very similar to my process as well. Because I think sometimes when I'm figuring out how to work a chapter, I'll end up like accidentally writing pieces of it. And then, yeah, I basically stitch them together. It's like, oh, I have to do the point A to point B part of this to get to like, and they need this setting, and then I need this
Right.
interaction and dialogue. I think it is very hard for me personally to not edit as I write. So
Mm.
I admire that quality of being able to just put it on the page. I think that's quite difficult.
Oh,
But
I'm working on it.
yeah, I know it is. It's sort of, it's a tendency, like you have to find a strike a balance, right? Like I don't think it's
Right.
necessarily a bad thing to edit as you write, but obviously it does slow down the drafting process. And obviously here at Story Garden, we outline all our books just so that we can make sure to assess them developmentally, like the big picture. So Jordan slash Riley Rookhouse is sort of shaping the outline, and then you together get to draft the book, and that makes it a lot easier versus just starting into a book with no sort of guidance whatsoever.
Exactly.
So what do you do when you hit like a roadblock in your drafting process?
Um, you know, like it's so simple, but it's really been like just super helpful for me in my own process has been to just like change locations. And I was reading about how they did some study about how working in cafes can like help unblock you when you're struggling with inspiration. And so like getting out of the house and going to a coffee shop is usually that's sort of been the easiest solution for me.
That's really nice. I think there's something about being around other people maybe that, I don't know, it either makes you feel more accountable or like, yeah, just puts you in a different headspace. And yeah, for me, sometimes I put on like cafe noise, like
Right.
background noise,
Yeah.
or like, rainy mood kind of stuff, like any sort of thing that makes it feel like I'm in some other setting if I can't go somewhere. But yeah, that's a really good approach.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, because I think it's something that's difficult for all writers is sort of keeping up the momentum. And especially for somebody like you, where you're kind of writing all day as a job, like you don't really have the choice to be like, oh, I don't feel inspired. Like you kind of have to get it done. So you have to
Right.
do, yeah, whatever it takes, really. So
For sure. Exactly.
yeah, and then so like with Unbound Life, there are a lot of like really intense scenes, I would say, and like really interesting character interactions and things like that. So I was curious if you drew from your personal experience for any aspect of the story, like either if it's the characters or the settings or any particular moments from it.
Wow. Good question. I mean, I guess I've always really enjoyed writing combat because I have done martial arts for my whole life, and so and then getting to do that like where they're actually monks and they're like training in martial arts, that was like the coolest thing because it's like, wow, I can actually like apply some of what I know and I don't have to research like I usually do. So yeah, that I would say that's the big one that stands out.
Yeah, and it's really valuable to be able to draw from personal experience, even when it's like a fantasy setting, like being able to put those things in there. And yeah, I know some people that they know a lot about riding horses. So obviously, writing fantasy, when you know a lot about horses, you can put that into a story and really make it feel realistic. So
Exactly.
that's really fun. And then I think that, so I had a question about the biggest revisions that you made, but obviously the big one is stitching together those separate novellas. But was there any other things that you changed in terms of like the characters or what happens in the plot that were like big changes?
Hmm. Um, I'm trying to think back. I think the biggest thing was just like distinguishing each of the main POVs from each other more, which is I guess it's always tough because we tend to drop into the same voice when we're writing multiple POVs, and so giving them each their own like distinctive flavor was definitely something like the biggest thing that stands out to me about revising it and reworking it.
Yeah, and I definitely sense that, and it's told in third person. So there's in your defense, like I think when you have a third person voice, it is much more. You want it to be tonally consistent as like a book, but
Right.
then each perspective does have a slightly different flavor. Like I would say that, like Mina as a character, who she's in Mina of Misfortunes, obviously too, but like she has a lot more like I feel like anxiety in her and like a lot more introspection, and then the other characters also have their own sort of personality flavors as well within the book, especially because I think that they all have very distinct goals. Like you said, they're all sort of, you're seeing the convergence of all those paths and what that does to them. So, but yeah, I could definitely, yeah, I think it's also normal to like go through a book and then, you know, you write the whole thing and then you go back to it and you start adding more because you know the characters better by the time that you get there.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's really great. But was there anything that surprised you while writing it then?
Oh, wow. I think maybe just how dark it got. I mean, I always sort of have had a thing for dark fantasy, but I think it was much more high fantasy in the first sort of iteration where it was three separate novellas that we were planning. And so tonally, like shifting it to much more serious and much more yeah, much darker. I would say it was a pleasant surprise because I love I love dark books, and so that was great. But yeah, I wasn't expecting it to go to some of the places it went.
Yeah, no, I that's what Jordan said as well. And I think that part of the reason he took that path is because he saw how well you wrote in that space, which
Oh,
some
thank
of our viewers might be surprised because you seem like kind of like a ball of sunshine a bit, but I promise you, she has a dark soul. Yeah. But yeah, like so I think Jordan was really impressed with that. And I think that it's really valuable for writers to lean into their strengths. And then especially with Story Garden, we try to match up the writers with the project to have like, oh, this is something they're interested in writing and something that they're really skilled at writing, and then can match that up. And I also like dark fantasy a lot. Like I love anything that has to do with like curses or you know, kind of powers that are definitely more curses than gifts. Like that is one of my favorite tropes. So that's something that I really enjoyed about Unbound Life. But yeah, that's really great. And then, so for those that are unaware, we do have an illustrated version of Unbound Life by our Story Garden's resident artist, Amy Agisi. So this is the illustrated version, which is slightly thicker than the original version. But I wondered if you had like a favorite illustration from the book that you can think of.
There's one from a scene near the end, this really cool monster. It's kind of like near the climax of the book that's got multiple arms, and it's yeah, I just as I was writing, that was like exactly what was in my head, and so she was able to perfectly capture that creature design.
Yeah, and let me see if I can find it in here. I'm so curious. Because it's like, yeah, toward the end. Because yeah, they're all interspersed throughout. I think I don't know how many there are in here, like a few dozen, it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see if like I can. I really like the general art style is like this is one from we did a video on the process shot for this one, and I really like that of the Temple Observatory. Like I just think that's very I don't know, it's mystical and inviting. And then yeah, there's a lot of like this style, it's almost like tarot card style, like art, like that.
Yeah.
Yes, I really love that. Yes, the many armed creature. I'll have to, it's like you just got to get the book, guys, and then you can find what illustration we're talking about. But yeah, there's really
in there.
yeah, there's really a lot in here. And then yeah, like I like this, yeah, the style of artwork is it's really cool. And I think it fits the tone of the book really well too. So
for sure.
Good. Yes. So yeah, so it's time for the toughest question of all. So what's your writing beverage or snack of choice?
Oh gosh.
You're like, it is the hardest question. Oh no.
That is, yeah, that's a really good just anything caffeinated. Cappuccinos I think are probably like, yeah, you just feel fancy when you're drinking cappuccino.
Yes, and you're writing in a cafe to
Right. Exactly.
you get to live out the writerly cliche for sure. Yeah, I get that. That's a great one. So and I know that yeah, a lot of people, they need their coffee, they need their tea when they write, and I think it's nice, a kind of a cozy part of the writing ritual to have something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So was there anything else that you wanted to share about the process for writing Unbound Life, or any advice for people looking to write a book in the high fantasy genre?
That's any advice? I think like the biggest advice that I would give, and this is advice that I give my coaching clients as well, is to just like get words on the page and follow your muse. And usually that's the biggest roadblock I found. And so it's just getting started, and then it just gets easier and easier. So yeah, just like dive in and see where it takes you.
Yeah, like you said before, like don't think too much. Like I think that is
Right.
something that the thinking too much is what prevents a lot of people from writing. Like they're trying to keep all this writing advice in mind and they're trying to think about their audience, but then sometimes you just need to have fun with the story and just go with the flow. For sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, this has been really great. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and to our readers, if you enjoy high fantasy, you can pick up your copy of Unbound Life over on Amazon. We have the ebook, we have the lovely print edition, and then there's the special illustrated edition as well. And we have the Mina of Misfortunes, which is the sequel as part of the Cast-Off series. So that's what this whole Unbound Life is, the first one. Mina of Misfortunes is one of the tie-in novellas, and we also have Viet Vows as well, which is set in the same world of Heavenfall. And so yeah, I posted all the links in the description. And we'll see you next time in our story garden.
Sweet.
Yay! Yeah.